$36 trillion. That's the total amount of debt the United States owes, a figure larger than the entire economic output of the nation. Every year, the government spends over $1 trillion just to service that debt's interest. This amount has already surpassed the world's largest defense budget. But this is not merely a financial issue. It is the first sign of a pattern that has destroyed every major empire in history. Spain was once the empire that dominated the world with vast silver inflows from the Americas. They controlled over half of the world's precious metals. Yet, in just 150 years, the empire collapsed, not because it was defeated on the battlefield, but because it self-destructed its own economic foundation. The British Empire was the global financial center, with the pound sterling as the world's reserve currency. They controlled 25% of the Earth's land. But after 2 world wars, Britain lost nearly its entire empire and had to beg the United States for loans to survive. The Soviet Union, the superpower that rivaled America throughout the 20th century, also disintegrated. Not due to a decisive war, but because its economic system was exhausted after decades of spending beyond its means. What do these collapses have in common? Not war, not revolution, not natural disasters, but a predictable sequence of economic and social signs. Today, I will analyze the 5 key signs that appeared before every major empire's fall. These are not random events, but clear warnings that a system has exceeded its own limits. And the alarming part is that all 5 signs have not only appeared in America, but many are in their most severe stages. Military overextension with over 750 bases worldwide. Continuous currency debasement through printing trillions of dollars. An uncontrollable debt spiral where interest costs exceed all other government spending. The irreversible loss of domestic productive capacity. And the internal disintegration of social structure. These signs are not vague predictions or baseless speculations. They are phenomena witnessed and documented in the collapse of every great empire in history. The question is not whether these signs exist in America. The real question is, when all 5 appear simultaneously, can what happened to every other empire be prevented? In this video, we will break down each sign in detail, examining historical evidence and real data showing where America stands in this pattern. And more importantly, we will understand why these signs are not just problems solvable by policy measures, but indicators of an irreversible process. Now, let's start with the first sign, the one that begins the decline of every major empire in history. The first and most critical sign is military overextension. This occurs when an empire expands its military forces far beyond what its economy can sustain. Maintaining too many commitments across multiple fronts creates an uncontrollable financial burden. Spain is the clearest example. In the 16th century, the Spanish Empire controlled territory stretching from the Americas to the Philippines. However, they had to maintain battle fleets on 4 oceans simultaneously to protect trade routes and colonies. As a result, over half of their national budget went to military operations. This led to repeated bankruptcies and ultimately the empire's decline. The British Empire fell into the same trap. During World War I, Britain maintained forces on multiple fronts: Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. They spent over $40 billion in 4 years, a sum far beyond their economy's capacity. When the war ended, Britain was bankrupt and had to borrow billions from America to continue existing. Today, the United States maintains over 750 military bases in more than 80 countries and has a military presence in 150 nations worldwide. America's defense budget exceeds $850 billion annually, more than the combined defense budgets of the next 10 countries. The U.S. is currently engaged in simultaneous commitments across multiple fronts, supporting Ukraine against Russia, confronting China in the South China Sea, dealing with Iran in the Middle East, and maintaining a large presence in Europe. When a nation disperses its forces across too many fronts at once, it cannot sustain superiority anywhere. This leads to diminished deterrence and ultimately the loss of respect from allies. The second sign is currency debasement through uncontrolled money printing. When an empire cannot generate enough revenue from real economic activities, it prints more money to fund its spending. This erodes the currency's value and destroys confidence in the monetary system. Spain debased its currency by mixing copper into silver coins from the Americas, leading to severe inflation and the monetary system's collapse. The British Empire was forced to abandon the gold standard in 1931, and the pound lost 25% of its value overnight. The Soviet Union witnessed the complete collapse of the ruble, where currency became worthless, and they resorted to barter. Since 1971, when the US ended dollar convertibility to gold, the dollar has become a fiat currency backed by nothing physical. Since then, the US money supply has increased over 400%. Particularly since 2020, the Federal Reserve has pumped over $6 trillion into the economy. As a result, the dollar has lost over 98% of its purchasing power since the Bretton Woods system collapsed. Currency debasement not only reduces the value of savings, but also destroys trust in the government's ability to manage the economy responsibly. The third sign is the debt spiral, where a nation borrows more just to pay interest on existing debts. This creates an unbreakable loop where debt servicing costs exceed the economy's revenue-generating capacity. Spain declared bankruptcy 4 times in 40 years, each time suspending debt payments and restructuring loans. Britain, after World War II, had debt exceeding national output and spent a large portion of its budget just on interest. The Soviet Union became unable to repay foreign debts and used all oil export revenue to maintain the system. Today, U.S. national debt has reached $36 trillion, equivalent to 120% of GDP. Interest payments exceed $1 trillion annually, more than the defense budget. With an annual budget deficit of about $1.8 trillion, America borrows more each year just to cover interest on existing debts. As interest rates rise, servicing costs will increase exponentially, creating an uncontrollable debt spiral. The fourth sign is the loss of productive capacity and increasing dependence on imports. When a nation shifts from producing goods to consuming products made abroad, it loses the real economic foundation to support its commitments. Spain relied on silver supplies from the Americas, but failed to develop domestic industrial production. When the mines depleted, they had no way to replace the income. Britain gradually lost its manufacturing capacity as industries moved to colonies and then competitors. The Soviet Union had inefficient factories with low productivity that couldn't meet domestic needs. America currently has an annual trade deficit of about $800 billion and has lost over 5 million manufacturing jobs since 2000. The US now depends on China and other nations for essential products like semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and consumer goods. This dependence creates strategic vulnerability and weakens self-sufficiency during crises. The final sign is social decay. When trust in institutions erodes, social cohesion disintegrates, and internal problems become uncontrollable, a nation loses the ability to focus on external challenges. Spain saw rising crime, corruption, and the emigration of top intellectuals. The British Empire experienced declining national spirit and loss of faith in maintaining the empire. The Soviet Union witnessed growing discontent, addiction rates, and institutional collapse. In America, trust in institutions has fallen to record lows below 30%. Crime and homelessness rates are surging in major cities. Over 100,000 people die from drug overdoses each year. Birth rates have hit historic lows, and millions of highly skilled individuals are leaving the country. Deep political polarization and loss of faith in democratic processes are weakening the nation's ability to address major issues. These signs do not exist in isolation. They interact and reinforce each other, creating an irreversible decline process. Military overextension pressures more money printing, which accelerates the debt spiral. Rising debt forces continued currency debasement. Debasement weakens productive capacity. And ultimately, all these factors lead to social decay and loss of institutional trust. We have analyzed the 5 key signs that appeared before every major empire's collapse: military overextension, currency debasement, the debt spiral, loss of productive capacity, and social decay. These are not isolated events or problems solvable by temporary measures. They are components of a larger pattern, a recognizable process repeated throughout history. The crucial point is that these signs do not operate independently. They interact and amplify one another in ways that create irreversible momentum. Military overextension demands more printing. Printing fuels the debt spiral. Escalating debt requires further debasement. Debasement erodes production, and all of it culminates in social decay and institutional distrust. History shows that once an empire reaches the point where all 5 signs manifest simultaneously, no policy, reform, or leader can reverse the process. Spain tried financial reforms and military reorganization but failed. The British Empire exhausted every option to preserve its financial dominance but still accepted decline. The Soviet Union attempted economic restructuring, but the core issues were too entrenched. Currently, the United States is not just exhibiting these signs, but is at a stage where they have become measurable, undeniable realities. National debt over 120% of GDP, interest costs exceeding defense spending, over 750 global bases, nearly $1 trillion annual trade deficits, and institutional trust at decades-low levels. The question is not whether these signs exist, but what happens when they all reach critical mass together. History provides a clear answer: a predictable decline where the nation's economic and military dominance is replaced by others. This does not mean an immediate collapse or total disintegration overnight. Instead, it will be a process where the US gradually loses the ability to shape global events, respect from allies, and faces increasingly severe economic constraints. The dollar will lose its reserve status, military commitments worldwide will be curtailed, and America's influence on international affairs will diminish. However, this process does not have to result in complete societal breakdown. Individuals and organizations can prepare and adapt. Those who understand the nature of this transition can protect their assets and position themselves to navigate it. The issue is not whether the US can entirely avoid decline. History shows that's impossible. It's whether those living through it recognize the warnings and act accordingly. Empires do not fall due to unexpected external events. They collapse because their internal problems accumulate beyond control. And the signs of those problems are not secrets. They can be recognized and understood by anyone willing to examine historical patterns. So the final question is, how will you approach these signs? Will you see them as temporary issues solvable by future leaders, or recognize them as indicators of a larger, irreversible process? Understanding these signs is not about predicting a specific collapse date. It's about realizing a process has begun, and those aware of it can make decisions aligned with reality rather than unrealistic expectations of recovery or perpetual stability. History forgives neither arrogance nor special exceptions. The greatest empires have undergone this, and the signs are now clearly visible. Recognizing them is the first step in facing the reality of what is unfolding. So, how do you view these signs? Are they just temporary problems that can be fixed, or indicators of a larger, irreversible process?